Dear colleagues, I'm really glad to welcome you all at 11:30 sharp, the beginning of our session. Today we have an honor to meet in a very representative panel to discuss with our distinguished experts the achievements and successes and maybe new tasks and challenges for BRICS. Russia, as you all know, takes the chair now in this organization. It's a big honor for us. Last time we presided in 2015, and we hope that the goals which were set in 2015 to transform BRICS from the dialogue format in the limited scope of issues to a full-fledged cooperation mechanism in key priorities in the area of economics and politics. This task was solved, and as was said by Sergei Alexeyevich in his speech, BRICS basically and really is an archipelago of stability in the sea, in the environment where we live. The environment is very complicated. There are a lot of geopolitical risks, and there are a lot of risks which haven't been present at the times where this format was established in 2009, and it was made at the level of the Ministries of Foreign Affairs. So the current agenda is really interesting and exciting. And first and foremost, I would like to introduce to you the main speakers. Sergei Ryabkov, Deputy Minister of Foreign Affairs of the Russian Federation, Russian Sherpa in BRICS. He leads a lot of other issues in the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, but BRICS is responsibility from the very beginning. He belongs to the team of people who are the architects of this institution. And similar things can be said about May Bokorev, Director, Department of International Financial Relations, Minister of Finance of the Russian Federation. Andrei Bokorev, as Sergei Ryabkov, apart from BRICS, leads a lot of other areas and projects, G20 and until recently G8, and also other international financial institutions, the New Bank of the Development. We hope he will share new information about it. And these people can give us a very comprehensive look at the problems in BRICS scope. Natalia Stapran, you know her very well, is the director of the Department for Multicultural Economic Operations in the Ministry of Economic Development of the Russian Federation, and she's also responsible for multilateral cooperation in different formats. Again, G20, 80, OPEC, where Russia takes part, and many other organizations and also partner organizations. Russia is cooperating with also and other organizations. We also have an honor today to welcome here in this room our distinguished experts from BRICS countries. This Professor Brandau, Deputy Director of Political Relations of Applied Studies, Political and Economic Relations Institute for Applied Economic Research, and we will have the chance to discuss the situation and the cooperation with Brazil. Mr. Binod Singh, Dr. Binod Singh, Director of National Committee for BRICS Research. He represents the expert community of India, and India will take the chair in BRICS after the Russian Federation, so the succession here is obvious. We have here three main countries, as we may say, Brazil, India, and Russia. Philonim Habu, Executive Director, Institute for Global Dialogue of South Africa, and he deals a lot with a lot of issues related to this civil dialogue and the dialogue of humanitarian aspects. Apart from economic and political issues, BRICS works with the cultural issues, and the cooperation in cultural areas is one of the most important. And finally, we have two representatives of BRICS Research Group, co-director of G20, of BRICS Research, co-director of G20 Research Group, John Curtin, and Madeleine Koch, managing director of BRICS Research Group, co-director of the G20 Research Group, University of Toronto. So we will have the chance to look from different angles at our work in BRICS, because we, as the representative of the Scholar Society, we belong to this process. We are part of this process, which goes on at the second track, or an unofficial track of BRICS projects. I'm finished with the welcoming speech, and now, first and foremost, I'd like to give the floor and give you a chance to listen to Sergei Ryabkov's speech first. And my main question will be related to the fact that really within these many years a lot of changes happened. We have now issues with cybersecurity, different problems for different institutions now, and BRICS does not take a lot of attention to this fact. Maybe I'm wrong, please correct me. And you also mentioned that BRICS is a very efficient tool, but we need to continuously improve its efficiency. What are priorities in this area you believe we need to provide in the times of Russian presidency in this organization, and also further on in future years? Thank you very much, Marina, and dear distinguished colleagues, dear friends, ladies and gentlemen. I am really grateful for the invitation to speak in this very authoritative session, and this is a very good moment to discuss the outlined topics, taking into account that 2 weeks ago we formally and we officially started to take our guard as BRICS chair, and we will coordinate our work within this young, less than 10 years, and very stable and absolutely efficient intergovernmental institution. I'd like to mention, in part of general comments, the following issues. First of all, for us, it's absolutely no question that BRICS, as a multilateral, multi-profile, and versatile institution, finished its initial stage, and we finished the period of finding ourselves, if you may. And today we all know, and we cannot imagine the architecture of foreign relations without our organization, without BRICS. We can cite a lot of figures. Some of these figures are shown on the screen, but if we take a general look, and if we take general parameters, and if we supplement what is presented here, so based on the results of 2018, the general GDP volume reached $43 trillion on the purchasing parity. Based on the WMF forecast for 2019, this figure should reach $47.6 trillion. And as a comparison for G7, the similar WMF forecast is 42.4 trillion per parity. I'm not going to bore you with a lot of figures today. I would just tell you that the countries, participants, member countries of the organization represent different continents, and in this regard, BRICS, in its geography, has a global footprint, a global coverage, and the member countries are very influential parties of such international institutions as UN, G20 Group, WTO, the group of 77, and also a number of other influential regional organizations, CIS, UOS, Shanghai Organization, BIMSTEC, Mercosur, African Union, and other organizations. The second moment, and I'm thankful for the compliments and references to some of our evaluations, but the question is not about the rhetorics, but about the essence. Amid the turbulent world, BRICS is an organization, a community which works only based on the principles of general approaches to foreign matters, and this is first and foremost the care for the international rule of law. This is consensus where no one imposes anything to anybody. And when the question is set why BRICS is not active in some areas, because the BRICS countries are really respectful to the national specifics of every country and specifics of approach to different aspects of the current international agenda. And without any doubts, I have to tell you that here I see a very strong part and not a weak part of BRICS. And the whole work in BRICS is built based on the principle of gradual population and not measuring of the volume, how the volume is empty and not like that. And this is a big advantage, same as the absence of bulky and big bureaucratic structures, especially supranational structure, which in a number of different situations start to work on their own agenda and in some parts start to dictate to the states different approaches and even decisions. And in BRICS, we came to a conclusion that it is very important to provide especially the networking, the work based on a networking principle without any hierarchy, without any special levels of the whole system. And this is a good reflection of the contemporary approach to solving international problems. In publications, in comments, and in different analyses which we all face, sometimes we note the statement of the fact that the multiple channels, formats, and areas of cooperation become a very ruling factor, a very management factor for BRICS. But I have to tell you that no one imposes anybody to cooperate in BRICS. If some ministries or academic communities, athletes, cinematical workers, if they realize and implement these forms of interaction, it means that it is interesting and efficient for them, and it adds some value to them. It brings and contributes an element of dynamics which is needed and which allows, and once again I repeat, to work and live and to find some basics and grounds in our turbulent world. I'd like also to note that it is very important for us to see BRICS working in all three components. And none of these components for us is more important for as politics, economics, humanitarian aspects, and inter-humanitarian relations. In all these areas, during the Russian presidency in BRICS, we've been realizing projects. We will make BRICS more available for the society. We'd like to bring to the BRICS concept to the broadest areas of socially active population of our countries. And this is reflected in different areas, such as the expected in this year activation of our well-known initiative on attracting of female entrepreneurs in the work of the responsible alliance. It is reflected in the improvement, enhancement of economic activity in remote areas. It will be done in the form of updating the economic cooperation strategy of BRICS. I'm not going to take the bread from my colleagues, and I'm not going to tell a lot about the financial part of the new bank of the development, although there are a lot of issues to share with you. The BRICS geography of the current year, the geography of the Russian chair, reflects the approach I mentioned. Apart from the St. Petersburg, where BRICS summit will be held in July, and apart from Moscow, where we plan a lot of important meetings of political matter in the area of, at the level of the ministries of foreign countries and higher officers responsible for the security and parliamentary issues. The program, the agenda of Russian Guard in things includes Yekaterinburg, Kazan, Novosibirsk, Samar, Saransk, Sochi, Ulyanovsk, Ufa, Chelyabinsk, Khanty-Mansiysk. And we have such projects as Festival of Culture, Sports Games, and the traditional Urban Forum, Forum of Young Leaders of BRICS and SCS countries. In total, more than 150 events of different culture. And in November this year, BRICS will come to Riyadh, where we will have traditional informal meetings of leaders in the fields of G20 summit. As for the motto of the Russian presidency, it is formulated as partnership for BRICS in the interest of the global stability, general security, and innovative growth. I think that this motto shows our commitment to promote our cooperation in all three key parts, components of the responsible areas of this cooperation. But how can we do it? We should promote it with the succession to the Brazilian chair, and I'd like to give the highest evaluation to the results of the Brazilian year.
And just create the possibilities and opportunities for all those who will catch up after us. These are our Indian friends from India, who have already a very interesting tradition of their participation in this event. I would like to underline and answer Marina's question on the theme related to the international information security, the cyber security, that we, of course, will pay specific and priority attention to this matter, but in such a way that everyone will feel comfortable during such a cooperation, so that we do not have a feeling that there is an artificial gradation of approaches and priorities. We need to be patient when looking for the common points of interest and points of cooperation, and we will work out our priorities. We will generate our binding document, as we think it is very important, so that we treat with due respect to all the opinions and to all the priorities articulated by our colleagues. We are going to work more with the peace cooperation in this space, and we do have specific ideas, directions, and plans and plans of activities. We have the BRICS actual matters to elaborate the unified international standards for countering the terrorists and fighting the proliferation of the terrorist attack and everything. Of course, we're going to fight the money laundering and terrorist sponsorship and financing. We are interested in getting back all the assets gained in a fraudulent or criminal activities. Of course, we're going to outreach and BRICS platform development. And in this way, I would like to kindly remind you that during the press conference in Brazil, the president of the Russian Federation, Mr. Putin, wanted to invite the Eurasian Economic and CIS leaders. It's in Petersburg. And we're going to have a very extended BRICS Plus format, for example, in Kazan. I'm not going to abuse your attention, and I would like to end up my presentation by mentioning that we're going to streamline our work this year, taking into account the very important anniversary date, 75th year anniversary of the United Nations at the end of the World War II. This is yet another memory for us that the future order should be based on a very stable international legislation norms, including the Charter of the United Nations, but not on a vague and ambiguous notions, rules, and regulations that are articulated by separate countries or separate states only just to make and force other countries to follow them and changing these rules later on, but not on a universal base, but to the benefit of one or a few countries. BRICS is not a geo counter to different approaches. This is a shop window of the most modern and contemporary approach to international affairs and issues that we are to resolve. This is yet another example for everyone the way you can and the way you shall in a constructive, democratic way to move towards resolving the unified and common problems for all the states and for all the international societies. Thank you, Sergey, very much. Well, we will have plenty of opportunities to ask questions, and I do hope that you will stay with us for some time. But in this relation, I would like to give the floor to Andrei, and it's absolutely clear that we're talking about achievements of BRICS, like the Bank of Development, the currency reserves. This is a great achievement, of course, but maybe there is something that BRICS is getting criticized for. For example, we want to transfer to investment, to settlement in national currencies, but still it is at the very early stage of implementation. At the same time, we see some aspects related to promoting the cooperation in finance market that show some achievements and some challenges. There are different aspects. Something that the new Bank of Development is a very minor institution. I'm not an expert, of course. I just name different opinions, different people. I believe that the Development Bank, Bank of Development, is a great innovation in international currency and financial architecture, but there is an opposite opinion. Andre, could you please express your opinion on different aspects of financial and economic cooperation within BRICS? Thank you, Marina. Hello. Dear colleagues, hello colleagues. I would like to express my appreciation to all the organizers for inviting me to take part in such a discussion, and I would like to expand on some of the theses and opinions and those that Sergey has already mentioned, and also I would like to comment a number of successes, achievements, or maybe some critical assessments of our BRICS activities. In order not to repeat anyone, we actually assess just BRICS. So the structure that has already implemented and actually realized the expectations we had. So that were already contributed by the founders, and it's extremely important that this process is regular. We have the streamlined format of cooperation. We also have, that Sergei has already mentioned, just new directions. Just, we get some initiatives and some ideas. Some say that the parties are interested in expanding the formats of cooperations as well as the formats, themes, subjects, and fields. And on an annual basis, we also study and review different aspects and possibilities. We accept and approve different final annual documents, not only at the leadership level, but at the level of ministers and at the level of other high-level experts. In this case, of course, we have some specific results that we can talk about. So, and this indication of the maturity of BRICS is just because today we have just, the idea of resolving some specific tasks. We get the institutes within the BRICS format. Or, for example, if we just talk the currency reserves, and it's a great example. Probably it would be correctly to say that the new Bank of Development, personally, I believe it's a great response to all different questions, ideas, and thoughts of a great number of skeptics on whether the countries and institutions is able to create similar institutions without the participation of Western expertise and participation of other economies, and whether they can cope with the task of this level. It's not a secret, of course, that in 1913 we actually mentioned different expert discussions and opinions, and in many cases the answer was negative, and probably everybody would expect that the result would be much worse. But at this very moment, we can easily say that probably we've managed to actually to shame these skeptics, and now we can talk about the new Bank of Development as and about a quite a notable institution, simply because I don't think that anybody of you will be able to name at least 10 similar institutions with a share capital totaling at 100 billion US dollars or euros. So this doesn't mean that this institution has less importance and that it is open for joining other participants. The other question is that in order to operate, first of all, this institution shall gain up the reputation, the practice, and everything else before it will be able to invite other members and other economies. So, in order not just to talk a lot about the Bank of Development, I would like to indicate that there is demand for it by the BRICS countries. And it's easy to say because as of today, we have already approved more than 40 projects within the portfolio of this institution, exceeding 12 billion US dollars. We have specific ideas that some countries take the lead from the president's point of view, some other countries, they stay a little bit behind, but in this very moment, we talk about a different thing. The partnership within the institute is actively implemented. And it's extremely important to note that it is going within the dialogue format when every participant hears the opinion of every other member, and the management of the institution is highly sensitive to all the ideas, to all the desires and ideas of the shareholders and founders. If we talk about risks or negative things, we would actually go by the financial track. Of course, on the one hand, we have the positive trend showed by the continuous expansion of our new agenda, new formats, new discussions, but at the same time, I must say that we do have specific risks that this expansion will, at some point of view, prevent us from going or for bringing our cooperation deeper within the existing formats and subject matters. And we must admit that different initiatives and different subjects proposed by the chairs, they are not always brought to specific agreements or results. Quite often, we have this situation that within 1 year we had a discussion, but it got stuck at this very discussion. We can easily cite an example. For example, we've been discussing the creation of a unified rating agency, but the discussion is still going on. We have a great number of other subject matters, for example, the accepting the mutual accounting requirements, accountability. We actually started, discussing this matter quite actively, but unfortunately, so far, we haven't been able to resolve this matter in the 5 format. And the result, the participant members and maybe the outside experts and observers may get a question: what shall we talk about this? Is this because not all the countries are interested in the chair proposals, or maybe it's simply because this subject matter was proposed not at the right point in time, a moment? But I would not really like to see, I would not like to see the top 20 experience. When we actually give you a subject matter topic to discuss, we have all the discussions going on, but it takes us nowhere. I do not want to see this. It's like the crisis of the current age. If we talk about the BRICS, I would like to put it straightforward. I would really like to avoid any similar things happening. In this situation, we would do everything to avoid any mistakes. Well, if we talk about our further work and development of collaboration in the sphere of finance, well, of course, we do think it's highly important to continue the work we have been doing so far, that we shall improve all the mechanisms of improving the efficiency of the new Bank of Development, the currency reserves, the analytical division that we've created, but still is not effective. We don't get the expected value out of the format. And of course, here we mean the achieving the agreement on the bond fund launch of BRICS. There are some technical challenges that require resolution. We do not have the final approval so far. And of course, we need to discuss the settlement in national currencies that was offered by the Brazilian chair, the idea of creating the trans-border settlement system of BRICS, But at this very moment, we can see that all the economies are interested in this matter, but there is no unified opinion as well as unified understanding of what option and what solution would be the most optimal. And of course, and I believe that it's highly important to note that BRICS shall, for itself, in the next year, or for the next 10 years, it shall more precisely articulate its positioning and its attitude not only just to its agenda but to the global agenda discussed at the G20 or UN discussions and all other institutions, because we, unfortunately, are the witnesses that in such formats we often see, for some reason, the decisions taken that do not comply with the interests of BRICS. The recent example is the actual declaration of the full failure of the negotiations on the 15th fulfillment of the capital. It's just due to the position of one single shareholder, and we had to admit that all the efforts of all the 20 countries fell flat. In this case, we are probably talking here about the thing that we need to talk, that for the next 10 years, BRICS shall take a more proactive way and role in generating this position, but not just, to propose some initiatives as a response to some threats, but it shall be the driver of this or that negotiations. One more thing, there is yet another subject matter that is still not being developed within BRICS. We're talking about the global expansion. It's not a secret that last year it exceeded 250 trillion US dollars, and we must say that the developed economies contribute into this, as well as the developing countries that exceeded 200% of its GDP.
As for BRICS, we have a big widespread, whereas Brazil has a low level of debt, China has quite high level of debt. Unfortunately, we have to state that G20, if they discuss these topics, they still are very far away from taking some decisions. And here we could state that BRICS could take over some initiative in this regard. From the point of view of some institutionalization or expansion of cooperation, at this stage we see rather the movement towards establishing of some special institutions, if they would be accepted and approved by other membership countries in subject matter areas, in financial track and other tracks. And here we should maybe speak about creating a supranational structure which could set some goals for BRICS and would be involved in other target setting. I don't think it would be very productive still. And the final thing I would like to mention in my speech, and drawing some lines and drawing some conclusions for the previous decade of our work, we must say that today, despite some certain documents of strategic matter for the strategic planning, nevertheless, so far we can only say how BRICS would be and how we are willing to see it in 10 years. It is still an open question now, and together with the participation of the expert community, it is of key importance to work out some ideas in this regard. And in the recent years, we should say that it is very popular to use the approach related to panel team of subject matter experts, of wise men who represent current or former officials, experts, scholars, or scientists who can prepare together a certain vision for the future development of different structures or cooperation format and where they could be after some period of time. I do not exclude such exercise for BRICS that could be of interest for our organization in order to understand better where we are heading and where we're going to move in the horizon of a long-term planning. Thank you very much. No microphone. As a matter of fact, those principles based on which BRICS is working, the general approach is networking principle and such weighed out evaluation of achievements and evaluation and assessment of challenges and prospects, and such combination of these most important principles in our cooperation allowed us to finalize the establishing stage of BRICS, and it allowed to many experts who were quite skeptical in the beginning, first and foremost Western experts. Now they can speak about this association as a concept of great powers who defend the democratic principles of the world order. And the new Bank of the Development is one of the great achievements in this regard, and the association itself is regarded as a value, as a very important value in the global management and a very valuable institute in the global management and global governance area. The economic development and economic cooperation of BRICS is a multifaceted strategy. We know the 2015 strategy envisages 8 spheres plus, and the work and coordination and it was a priority area, coordination of multifaceted institutions in WTO, now under the chairmanship, and the whole 5 countries have a task to create, work out a new strategy, which will also lead to better understanding what will our association look like in 10 years from now, because 5 years, it's an important road, it's a big journey for the next stage. So, of course, there are some global trends, global milestones, sustainable development goals, which are shared by BRICS also, but there are other specific features related to the fact that in some cooperation and trade cooperation aspects we do have synergy, somewhere we don't. Well, how do you evaluate current achievements? What priorities do you see here, and what is the work is going on? How is the work is going on now? Thank you very much, Marina, for the opportunity to speak and to share our vision to work. We, as the Ministry of Economic Development, are doing, and you were absolutely right by saying that our ministry has the responsibility to create an updated strategy of economic partnership. And in our understanding, this should be the document of a broader spectrum, of a broader sense, unlike the very narrow economic agenda. And when we started this job, our first approach was to analyze the results which we achieved after the implementation of 2015 strategy. And the main thing which we understood that the world has changed completely. And in the previous strategy, it was mentioned already now, many things were not even planned for. In the previous strategy, we practically didn't have the digital agenda. The separate aspect is security, of course, that in general, there were no digitalization, there were no digital aspects of education and our whole life. This is a huge block, and which will be included in the new strategy, preempting my speech. The second thing, in 2015, the global situation was absolutely different. The economic situation was different. Now we understand that we find ourselves in the status of sanctions, trade wars, very huge volatility, and growing protectionism. This absolutely different rhetorics, unlike what we had in 2015. And this aspect for us, it was very important to take into account by setting the task to preempt and to forecast what will happen in 5 years when because our strategy is approved for 5 years. We can provide a certain foresight here and have a sneaky peek into the future. Of course, we proceed from a positive scenario, but obviously this current situation of the trade confrontation and protectionism will hardly be solved in the next 5 years. For sure, we'll have an evolution here. Some points of force will be changed and the relations will change, but nevertheless it will happen. And I also would like to support you in saying that the growing influence of sustainable development and the importance of the mechanism in this regard. And here in Russia, in-house, we've been spinning out this agenda very actively, because in July we will have the first voluntary review of sustainable development achievements, and we are leading educational work in our country. We have a narrow understanding of what is sustainable development is. Of course, it's a global agenda which first and foremost is related to economics. And here we also have a bunch of priorities which was already mentioned. Enhancement of female entrepreneurship, the first topic of sustainable development, and climate change issues, which also directly influence the energy part and the industrial part, and a number of other economic aspects. In this way, proceeding from these 3 priorities, in our updated strategy, we propose 3 key blocks. These blocks are not isolated, of course. It is very difficult now to split one part from others. They are all interconnected and interrelated. But nevertheless, well, the first block in our updated strategy, which we just yesterday proposed and submitted for comments to our partners in BRICS Association, is sustainable trade and investment, and this trade and economic aspect. For Russia, we see here mutual understanding with our partners. It is very important to see WTO agenda, WTO reform, a restoration of normal functioning of this organization. In this regard, we have some mutual understanding and consensus. In some parts, in some issues, we have different approaches, of course, with our BRICS partners. I'm not going to go very deeply into detail here, but generally speaking, the understanding that those global trade regulation mechanisms and multifaceted trade system mechanisms are very important for all 5 members, it is quite obvious. Apart from that, in the same block, we plan to raise issues of sustainable investment in the infrastructure, and in this regard, the BRICS Development Bank, and in the previous session we have a presentation of BRICS initiative on sustainable infrastructural investment. There are a lot of issues there, of course. There are some differences, different interpretations, including interpretations from Western partners. Obviously, we see a very active investment policy from the part of China in the new BRICS Bank, and those principles which are going to be accepted. And here we see a dilemma between human-oriented and sustainable investment. And there's a big talk on this topic. I hope by the end of the chairmanship, BRICS countries will build the general principles and guidelines in this regard, which we will take into account in the future. The second big block is innovative economy, digital economy, in the interests of the humans. and this is also reflected in our innovative motto. We should also reflect the digital aspect here first and foremost. The digital aspect is not standalone, of course. Now it is a breakthrough and end-to-end instrument and toolkit for all other areas, including development of the human capital, including development of the industry number 4, Industrial Revolution number 4, which was already discussed previously. And now we segregate this block in a standalone block, in the standalone module. We're going to talk there about the breaching the digital gap, development of digital infrastructure, and a number of other new economical matters, new digital economics, rules of digital economics, which hasn't been discussed before. And here, answering to your question on cyber security and cybersphere, here we are willing to regard it in a more pragmatic way. This is a man in a digital economy. We have an initiative which we've been developing within G20 group, defending the consumer rights in the digital community. And this local BRICS countries, we hope, will help to create the rules code, if you may, how to protect the human being in this situation, because we see growing opportunities, and they're growing in the same speed as the growth of threats. And these threats are not always global and strategic, which we consider, of course, but also day-to-day life threats. Since these are digital platforms, we do have initiative of interaction between digital platforms of BRICS countries, and I hope that by the end of this year we will be able to generate a set of rules and generate a set of approaches regarding the functioning of e-trade and e-commerce, proceeding from the rights of consumers. And finally, the third block is the sustainable development and sustainable growth. Here we have a number of topics too. We already mentioned some of them. From the Russian point of view, we looked at it, we consider it, and we see a very big territory. The questions of territorial development, remote territories development, opportunities for people in distant corners of all our 5 countries is on one hand a serious challenge for all 5 countries, and on the other hand this is now a very active point in the agenda of all the governments of our countries. A key initiative in this track is the general joint concept and strategy of remote territories development, exchange of best practices in this area. Of course, clear we cannot go without digital technology here, because of tele and remote medicine, government services in the remote format. But this topic for us should become a prerequisite of a very balanced and equal development and equal opportunities for the population of our countries. These are 3 big blocks I wanted to share with you. It's clear that many ministries give their own proposals, and I hope we will get some reaction and feedback from our BRICS partners. And our goal is to present it in July in the summit, the updated strategy, which is going to take into account new reality of our economic life. Thank you very much. I thank you very much for distinguished speakers. And now I'd like to use this opportunity to give now the floor to the distinguished participants. Just 5 minutes, 5 to 10 minutes, just to quickly ask some questions. Because, well, as I understand, you already mentioned that you have to go. Mr. Repkov, Maria Williams, thank you very much. I should not conceal that, unfortunately, there are some overlaps of events, and if it's not, it will not be very obtrusive from my part by distinguished participants of this panel. I am ready to take comments and questions and react on them, of course. but after 15 minutes, I will for sure have to run and have to leave you. I'm sorry. Now we have an opportunity to spend these 10 minutes on questions and answers, because this is a unique opportunity for us, a unique panel of speakers here. Well, and Mr. Repkov, who is basically leading the whole our architecture, Mrs. Stapran, who is responsible for economics, and Mr. Bokorev, who is responsible for finance and international track. It is very precious. Now, dear colleagues, please do not be shy, don't hesitate. Please ask your questions, because Mr. Repkov will leave us soon. Please introduce yourself and ask your question. Good morning. My name is Leonid Kovacic. I'm chief editor of Sputnik Agency. My question is the following. At the recent BRICS summit, it was actively discussed to have an opportunity to introduce our own payment systems, which was already mentioned today. And there were messages that there are plans to introduce even the cryptocurrency in BRICS countries, own cryptocurrencies. We understand that amid the growing joint trade and commerce, and recently statistics on Russian-Chinese trade was published, and the trade turnover grew in this regard. What are the perspectives, and what is the reality and relevance of transferring to national currencies inside a certain BRICS system? Is it possible or not in the nearest future? If yes, what is the timeline for that? Thank you. Thank you very much. We will collect questions quickly, and then I will give them. I'll just see a few words. John, please.
Mr. Rybkov, you mentioned that this year we have two BRICS summits, St. Petersburg to Riyadh. Could you tell us how you think strategically about the relationship between the two? What agenda items you think of emphasizing at each, how you would build on the achievements of the first at the second, and then how you would take the BRICS agreements from both to develop a consensus initiative momentum at the broader G20 summit, of course, of which all BRICS members individually and collectively are a key part.
It's very interesting to hear what's going to happen in Russian presidency in 2020, because the Indian idea of National Development Bank was finally confirmed in Russia. And I would like to ask Honorable Sherpa from Russia, what is the BRICS mechanism if the 5 member countries, if they disagree on something? So is there some inside voting mechanism that let's go for voting? Or how do we, BRICS members resolve the differences on certain issue? Thank you so much.
Yes. Are there any other questions? Sergey, you too? Well, thank you. As for the first part, and of course, together with our appreciated members from the economy, I cannot say anything from the political point of view and political approach as a division, as an organization that coordinates the external political affairs. We do support the implementation of these types of practices, but if you want to go into details, of course, I would like to ask my colleagues to expand on this.
This is not something unusual for BRICS, and it's not something that Russia introduces for the period of its own presidency. It's been an established practice when leaders of BRICS countries meet in the margins of G20 summits. Actually, since the establishment of BRICS as we know it today, we make a difference. We, meaning countries participating in this grouping, distinguish between the formal BRICS summit, which usually concludes with a robust and quite meaty, and I would recognize at times lengthy, final communique and a set of practical deliverables in terms of documents in addition to this and agreements achieved. And this is the policy statement, in a sense, where issues like you referred to, including G20-related agendas, are being addressed, and the degree of detail, the degree of substantiality in its approach is also growing by the year, at times to an extent that some elements of these final communiques are written only for the experts to be understood, which is, you know, a handicap in my view, because being a representative of a more political structure, we want more straightforward and understandable messages at times, but we will work on this. Informal summits, contrary to the formal ones, allow for a more free-flowing exchange on a current agenda, on most topical issues, and press statements issued that are being issued upon the conclusion of informal summits in the margins of broader international events are less political and more factual, where participants highlight and point out in practice areas of their address and their, you know, interaction and their exchanges. So this is how it works. So we don't know actually what would be the topicality of international issues November next when G20 meets in Riyadh, but I'm sure leaders will have ample opportunities to go through all this, and this will be preceded by a formal St. Petersburg declaration or whatever communique, which will start our drafting work and exchanges among membership of BRICS in due course, so that there is not a situation of time constraints or artificial rushing into last moment agreeing on something. So we want to make sure that all this is being performed in an open-minded and friendly manner. And it brings me to the second question, sir, question of yours, where there is no such thing as voting in BRICS. It's always consensual. We always focus on how we are able to find a common denominator. One would say that BRICS moves forward at the speed of slowest going ship. Others would claim that BRICS is driven by full respect to national specificity, and it's no problem when we are not able to progress on something this year and next year again, because some fundamental interests, approaches, and priorities are different. That's not a problem. We should, you know, focusedly and deliberately work on addressing those in a manner that will build consensus. And the success of New Development Bank is also rooted in this approach. Otherwise, I think this institution will not function with the, I would say, a very impressive record and practical results. One of those being things of improvement of infrastructure in my country. We are weeks away from a formal inauguration of a set of minor hydroelectrical hydro stations for electricity generation in northwestern part of Russia, which is Karelia, that have been financed through one of the first New Development Bank's loans to Russia. And we have several new arrivals along this line, so both in terms of political messages and in terms of practical deliverables, I think we are moving forward, and we see no problem when we, for instance, may see differently on things like what might be the proper methodology how to address the reform of UN Security Council. For instance, although this issue occupies a very important place at the BRICS agenda, and leaders and officials under the leaders deal with this very intensively and focusedly. If we not progress towards a consensual approach, it only means that differences should be worked through further. Thank you.
Спасибо большое, Андрей Андреевич.
Thank you very much, Andrei. But before I give the floor to you, could you please answer the question on the pay systems? But first, I would like to add one more question. You were saying that BRICS perhaps should be implemented in different economic situations. For example, we shall show more leadership skills. But probably this question will relate to all G5. Some of the countries include the important question of financial stability development within the framework of different cybersecurity and information security. For example, together with the Basel Committee, they started working in this direction. Do they have any reflection of this type of question and problem in the G20 agenda? Perhaps these are the threats that constitute the new technologies. I do understand that this agenda may not be merely financial, but it may refer to political division, for the security one. But as this is the financial stability, I believe you're also the one who is able to answer the question. You were also mentioning the investment principles that were accepted by the G20 back in 2016, 2019. Is there any continuation of the work? Is there any progress? Well, thank you. If you let me, I would like to start with the payment systems. On the one part, of course, there is no smoke without fire. This matter is exactly in the agenda of BRICS, and last year our Brazilian colleagues proposed to discuss this matter's idea, creating a trans-border BRICS payment system. And we were talking about minimizing the engagement of corresponding account opening. We don't want, and actually we want to go without opening correspondence accounts in different third-party or transnational banks, but we want actually to rely on the national banks of our countries. And of course, we need to say that this subject matter deserves maximum attention and development. And I cannot say that we have heard any reactions demonstrating lack of interest. But there is another thing. This is quite a challenging subject matter. It requires a great number of coordinated decisions and solutions. This matter may not be resolved merely by the efforts of national governments, regulatory bodies. We shall also engage some movements from below, some initiatives and interests from the participants, from the transactional participants. First of all, here I'm talking about the banks, companies of our countries, and we shall have very precise and very discreet demand for such a system. Otherwise, it will be a simple layout mechanism without any demand and without any use. Of course, All the G5 countries support the position that the search for this solution will enable us to ensure the settlement security. It will decrease the risk of non-payment for this or that person because of thought-out reasons. Of course, we're also talking about the decrease of dependence from international reserve currencies. At the same time, we need to admit that the settlement volume in national currencies between G5 is not significant. And if we look at the product turnover in financial operations, then of course we can say that we see that US dollar predominates. So therefore we shall bear this in mind. Second thing, by creating a new Bank of Development, we agreed that apart from rendering financial assistance in US dollars and euros, the bank will loan cash in national currencies. Therefore, we take active steps towards this solution. For instance, in June, we have also approved a set of actions, a set of programs, and this year we're going to on the Russian market of different bank tools and utilities so that Russian companies and associations will have access to these solutions. But needless to say, we're going to do this stepwise. And during this discussion, I'm not ready to say that he's suspended or terminated, but this is required by this situation. We need to think over this problem, think about the structure that will satisfy all the countries and that will enable us to satisfy our goal. For example, if we're talking about Russia, one of the first steps could have been the creation a unified financial operation messenger system. It's like a SWIFT solution. It's like, the one we use in Russia with a number of our contractors. In this case, we kindly ask our partners to think about the use of all this settlement system throughout all the BRICS countries. We are also thinking about the implementation of all other elements for the mutual settlement activities. If we talk about the unified cyber currencies, I don't think it's quite timely thing to talk about. It's not a secret that for G20, they, have quite opposite opinions related to the national currency. For example, in China, all other type of cyber or digital currency is not allowed. So we need to think about the fact that the international society has not yet elaborated a unified approach to the cryptocurrencies, regardless of their benefits and disadvantages. Therefore, we may say that we cannot actually go swimming into somewhere without a clear understanding of all this situation, if we're talking about the sea terminology. So it's a bit too early to talk about this. Therefore, we do have this in agenda and we're going to discuss it anyway, but it's absolutely hard to forecast what we're going to get it. But I'm absolutely sure that we will not create such a system by the summit in St. Petersburg, but we're going to engage the Bank of Development, and it's clear that we've had this matter for a few tactics because we've included this into the declaration of our leaders. We required, it took 1 year in order to generate all the required articles of association, sign them up, and only after this we got the physical creation of the bank infrastructure and transaction launch. Therefore, I believe that we possibly are going to continue this stepwise approach. As for other parts of your question, I believe that the most appropriate would be to say that, sure, this matter is well demanded for. We also discussed it during the financial session. But at the moment, we do not have any real solutions or decisions taken. But if we say about the leadership role in elaborating different types of decisions, then here it may be quite clear that BRICS may take this leadership role. Maybe it's a bit too early to say that, but there are only a few institutions in the world that you can rely on when elaborating these types of solutions. For example, the International Council for International Stability, the BRICS Commission, and etc. But here, even if we talk about the active participation of BRICS countries in discussion of this matter, so we will not be able to relate and to engage this type of expertise and institutions. Therefore, probably the G20 format is more appropriate for the discussion of this matter. Thank you. Thank you, Sergey. On behalf of all the participants, I would like to express my appreciation. I do understand the need to leave, and we highly appreciate your time and your presentation. But I do hope that we will have more opportunities to discuss these matters with you, as well as from the academic society. We will also generate some ideas, proposals that would be demanded for at the next development stage of BRICS. Marina, thank you. I highly appreciate your understanding. I would like to wish all the members of the discussion a lot of luck and success. We're also open to cooperation to any type of format. We're going to expand it because we love BRICS. We also do love BRICS.
Наталья Валерьевна, скажите нам про инвестиции в инфраструктуру, принципы.
На самом деле вопрос.
This is an important question for us because investment principles into the infrastructure is in the scope of Mr. Bokarev's department in G20. I can just shortly report you on the results. There were 6 big blocks approved and by G20 investment in the sustainable development, economic efficiency for the whole life cycle, and general economic aspects for territorial development, strengths and resistance against natural calamities, and infrastructural investment, creation of new jobs, and general model number 6 on the infrastructural investment management quality. This document was approved not easily in G20, and also the 5 BRICS countries didn't have the full consensus here. This year, again, maybe Andrei will support me and add some words. The topics were brought up to the platform of development banks. We have a separate format for meetings of banks. Our key bank is WebBank, which basically promoted this initiative. And as far as I understand, this year within BRICS and based on G20 principles, there will be new approaches proposed. Also, an active role will be played by subject matter experts of OECD. And they are here in this platform, and in the nearest days they are planning some meetings here. And the third big block is business orientation. In OECD there are responsible business conduct principles, and I think there's going to be a consolidated, maybe deeper and expanded document other than was in G20. Thanks a lot, dear colleagues, and we are moving to our next part of our discussion. Professor Brandau.
Of BRICS has just been completed, and with this, with the heritage of the past year, and the principles of consistency and continuity, which our colleagues say are the pillars of BRICS cooperation. How do you view the key achievements, and what is your vision for the forthcoming and vision of priorities for the forthcoming period?
Thank you, Marina. Good morning. First, I would like to thank the Gaidar Forum organizer, and it's an honor to be here today. And second, to have been able to learn to speak Russian, and maybe that will be lucky for you, because if it's just like my English, that will be a pain for you. And I will present some issues and recommendations on the topic prioritized by the Brazilian government for discussion at the BRICS Academic Forum. My institution, IPEA, my institution, IPEA, is a Brazilian government think tank that provides assessment and recommendation of public policies, and it was the main focus at the last year BRICS Academic Forum, evaluated and proposed issues that are useful for public policy. The document produced at the presentation of Academic Forum can be found at IPEA site, and we focus on 6 themes. The first, the financial for development. Second, the trade for investment. Third, science, technology, and innovation. Fourth, energy and development. Transition, crime, and agriculture. There are always some general recurring issues and recommendations, but I will focus only on the 6 specific topics. The first topic is financial for development. There are more than 550 development financial institutions in the world with total assets of more than $5 trillion. The new development bank is only one of those institutions, and it needs to face some challenges as the number of projects, processing times, and the amount of credit granted. It's hard to estimate natural capital costs, a problem not exclusive of the BRICS. Other issues are how to increase the private interest in infrastructure projects and how to make BRICS market integration. For this first topic, the recommendations are expand the number of projects and credit provided by the new development banks and improve counterbalance. The main problem on the NDB is the low project, and the risk involved. Promote a great integration in financial markets by the creation of common rules concerning bank system, stock markets, clearing procedures, anti-corruption, and offshore activities. Also create a BRICS payment system and a stock exchange alliance. The participation of the BRICS in the global trade has been stable since 2011. Although there has been an increase in inter-BRICS trade as a proportion of their total trade, the levels of inter-BRICS trade are still low. The investment flow and stock levels are also low. Digital trade and e-commerce has been a solution for the geographical distance and has the potential to increase the share of trade and service, but the BRICS Council has some of the most restrictive regulation in the world. For this topic, the experts suggested the need to create a free trade agreement or a partial scope agreement between the BRICS, but be careful with sensitive sectors and regulatory measures. Creating a BRICS visa will also suggested which could facilitate flows of business people, academic, and tourists. Work together to provide information related to the current domestic regulation and share existing methodological approach and best practices to enhance digital trade policy assessment tools. Articulate its common digital agenda in such areas as information security, paperless trade, consumers, and EPR protection, trade, and services. We need to recognize the importance of expanding the cooperation on science, technology, and innovation in the context of the fourth industrial revolution. We also need to recognize that inter-BRICS STE cooperation is very limited, but it's an opportunity for research institutes, universities, companies, government institutions, and think tanks. Increasing the STI cooperation will require working through networks involving a large number of actors, including those in the state, market, and civil society. The boundaries of the digital economy continue to expand. The main recommendations of this topic are the creation of a technology alliance, expand the cooperation in various issue areas as crowdfunding and peer-to-peer, third-party payment, and cross-border e-commerce, blockchain and digital currency, big data, and artificial intelligence. Given the importance of ethical aspects of certain types of research, the BRICS could form an ethics working group, and the creation of agreement of acceptable technology application would help fast-track technology transfers between the BRICS countries. We have many issues associated with the energy and development topics. A very important issue is the need of address energy poverty and inequality by increasing the access to the electricity. The BRICS countries are key players concerning energy, consuming and emission, and emitting CO2. But OECD count consumer-based emissions are much higher than production-based emissions, while the BRICS have the opposite situation. The recommendations are seek for pathways to diverse energy supply sources, include renewable and low-carbon energy sources, create mechanisms for attracting investment in energy infrastructure and energy industry, elaborate strategies for ensuring universal energy access and energy affordability, consider participating in the energy research cooperation platform that was established following the BRICS declaration, the creation of a BRICS Energy Think Tank Alliance, strengthen infrastructure construction and cooperation in oil and gas pipeline networks, as well as improved electricity installation and power grids. And six, in the short term, to substitute old by modern coal technologies. The cooperation for fighting transnational crime is always a hot topic, but transnational crime is a complex issue that has been a central concern for the international community over the last 3 decades. The main recommendation and desire are the creation of the Joint Commission aimed at expanding cooperation. It includes the cooperation among government sectors, subnational governments, civil society organizations, universities, among others. They also need to create common terminology and approach which could contribute to standardized definitions. Increase the effort of the expenditures finalization and adoption of the Comprehensive Convention on the International Terrorism by the United Nations General Assembly. The last topic is agriculture cooperation. The food problem is not a question of whether our planet can provide enough food to feed a growing population, but of whether it can produce food at price everyone can afford. Currently, around 11% of people in the world are underfed, a percentage that decreased continually for many years, but that started to increase in 2015. The BRICS countries are in the top 20 in terms of food export in the world, and all 5 countries have strong agricultural research systems. Non-tariff barriers among the BRICS, which have increased the science 29, differs from what happened with tariff barriers, affecting especially agriculture, products, and development countries. The main recommendations for cooperation on agriculture are increase the public and private agricultural investment, protecting small farmers, increase investment in water infrastructure, using information and communication technology, and promote climate resilience agriculture. Large investments in research and development, as well as approach that consider agriculture as an interdisciplinary science encompassing biology, economics, and public policy. Discussion on the role of non-tariff measures in the intra-BRICS trade. And the creation of the BRICS Agricultural Information Exchange System and the BRICS Agricultural Research Platform. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Again, I think that we will have time for questions and answers in the end, and I would like now to give the floor to Pilani Tebu, Executive Director, Institute for Global Dialogue, South Africa. And as far as I know, one of the key issues you are looking at is how the civil dialogue can contribute to the success of the BRICS as an institution.
Thank you very much, colleagues. Thanks for the opportunity. I'll be brief, but I'll just focus specifically on this point. And I think where our institute basically works, we work within the area of multiple track diplomacy. So we're involved both in first track, government to government, track 2 among think tanks and academic institutions, and also track 3. With civil society actors. In South Africa, you also have quite a strong interest from labor organizations to be involved within the BRICS discussions. So where we see ourselves is really falling in between, both being able to engage government, whether it's through the executive, whether it's through parliament, but also in the ability to engage think tanks and to engage with civil society. And I think that's been one of the key areas, I think, of achievement in the last 10 years. I think what's happened is that if you want to deepen cooperation, it's never enough to only have government to government. If you truly want to deepen cooperation amongst the BRICS countries. But it is important that the government level opens up the space for other actors to actually participate. And I think to varying degrees, we've seen a certain level of success within the last 10 years. So, for instance, whether it's the academic forum that you make mention of, which has been very important. And I think what tends to happen even with these academic forums is that institutes and scholars that are participating in these fora tend to also create further fora for cooperation amongst themselves, outside even of government intervention or outside of even government support. You know, some of these institutions have their own budgets, they have their own plans, and for instance, we notice throughout in our various interactions how much the joint research and how much the interaction among scholars has taken place outside even of the realm of government. So, you know, when we participate and when we interact with some of the embassies, for instance, in our own countries, I think they always find it encouraging to see how much interaction is taking place that they as government are not even aware of. And I think that's been quite an important factor in actually deepening the participation and in deepening the levels of interaction amongst the BRICS countries. So that area of multiple track diplomacy, and that's also enhanced by, for instance, the new development bank. And I know that in the Brazilian presidency, there was a strong interest in ensuring that your BRICS Business Council is also interacting more strongly with the new development bank. And I think that also serves to strengthen that aspect of multiple track diplomacy, because when we have the private sectors of the BRICS countries, you know, not necessarily waiting for each BRICS summit to be interacting through the BRICS Business Council, but that they themselves are actually empowered to continue these interactions in between summits. And I think that serves to actually strengthen this interaction. So the challenge in the next decade is to ensure that that space, track 2 and track 3, continues to be consolidated. Because like I said previously, it's not enough and will not be enough to only enhance cooperation amongst government-to-government actors. In fact, cooperation will be deepened when you actually have your civil society from BRICS countries doing joint work together, meeting even outside of the formal BRICS fora, and also when you have increasing joint research. And I think this is what's going to be important also moving into the next decade. We know how negative broadly speaking, Western research institutions and also media were actually in covering the inception of BRICS. Now, of course, this doesn't apply universally when it comes to Western institutions, but generally speaking, there was a level of I think the expectations were not very high. And I think there were expectations that this grouping, because of the different economic size, different makeup of these countries, that they would not actually be able to cooperate. And I think it's going to be important amongst research institutions from the BRICS countries to really begin to take the narrative of BRICS forward from their own perspective, so that what we read about BRICS is increasingly produced by scholars and institutions within the BRICS countries, rather than being shaped by a narrative outside of these particular countries. And that includes, challenges amongst your civil society, challenges amongst scholars of these countries. I think if we can do that in the next 10 years, then we will actually ensure that the BRICS cooperation is not only top-down, but that it is also bottom-up. And we've seen even, for instance, in the Chinese presidency and also in the South African presidency, that there was even an invitation of political parties within BRICS countries. And that was quite interesting, because I think what it showed is that irrespective of political changes that might or might not take place in the BRICS countries, it's important that there is buy-in from a broader spectrum of society of the importance of BRICS in the geopolitical and geoeconomic landscape, because otherwise any particular change in any country would then affect the whole grouping. And I know that, for instance, there was amongst think tanks, among civil society and so forth, you know, they were looking with great interest, you know, at the Brazilian presidency, for instance, because there was a change in political leadership. But I think what we've seen is that despite those changes, is that the foundation that's been created in the past 10 years and the fact that the cooperation extends beyond government-to-government actors ensures that the foundation has been set and that it could potentially be deepened in the next 10 years. I think let me leave it there.
Thank you, Ioannis, thank you. Я очень...
So, I do agree with the fact that the cooperation of academic society is highly important within BRICS, of course, and the creation of different researchers within BRICS framework. But I believe that it is as important to ensure the cooperation of academic society of BRICS and our Western colleagues. This will enable us to provide a balanced vision. And I'm really glad to see that over these 10 years, we see that the attitude in Western expert society has changed. And here I mean it Western, South African, European societies, their attitude has changed in relation to the BRICS development assessment. And here I believe that partially we have contributed by the constant attention to this institute and to the Union, and the discussion of the progress that is awaited discussion may generate, as well as the subjective assessment of the progress that is here in place. John Cotton,
the research group, and he is also co-director of the BRICS research group at the University of Toronto, and he is one of those colleagues who has been following carefully the developments of the new institutions, and he also focuses his research on such areas as climate and energy and sustainable development, and the role of the BRICS in ensuring that sustainable development goals are achieved is, and the Paris Agreement goals are achieved, is one of his key concerns. John?
Спасибо большое, Marina.
Mar-
To hear from our representatives of the Russian government that climate change is on the agenda of their work doing this year, because if we take the central theme of the St. Petersburg summit, stability, economic and financial stability, as Mark Carney realized, humanitarian stability, even security stability, is really climate stability now. So that's why I think we have to remind ourselves of all the good work the BRICS Summit and its supporting ministerial meeting has done on climate change, and look for opportunities about what it could do this year to solve the central crisis of our time. Climate change has been on the BRICS Summit agenda at every summit since the start, with a peak the last time Russia hosted at UFA in 2015. That's when the BRICS introduced the Environment Ministers meeting, which has become an annual forum. Now, much of the BRICS work has really been supporting what the UN, what the G20 and other bodies have done on climate change. But the last time Russia hosted UFA, it turned to look at the BRICS themselves and got the members to agree to strengthen cooperation amongst the BRICS countries on agriculture, food, and nutrition to control climate change. So this year, I think the crisis is front and center. The scientific reports of the United Nations say that global temperatures, concentrations of greenhouse gas emissions, which really count, and the emissions are rapidly rising, approaching critical thresholds that will bring catastrophic consequences and several irreversible ones. And we know that from our own lived experience. Russia's Arctic, as well as Canada's, warming twice as fast as the global average. But Russia ravaged by forest fires this year. Moscow, its warmest December ever. China, emissions rising again in its economic capitals. Shanghai, Guangdong, about to be submerged by the warming rising seas and extreme weather events. India, unprecedented air pollution, closing schools, factories, bringing a big spike in premature deaths. Brazil, the unprecedented forest fires in the Amazon, the lungs of the earth. South Africa, also warming twice as fast as the global average, and since 2015, an unusual prolonged drought that almost drained Cape Town dry of drinking water, scorched grazing lands, and kept the tourists away. So I think we know. Last year, the G7 summit tried to address the climate crisis. It failed. So did the G21. And the United Nations ones too. So this year, it's up to the BRICS to do it, if only because they're the most vulnerable and there's no time to lose. The BRICS have the capacity to do it. As my colleague from Brazil noted, the 5 BRICS countries together responsible for 42% of global greenhouse gas emissions, vastly more than the little G7 with only about 24%. China first by a long margin, 28% of the global total, more than the United States in a distant second. Then in third and fourth, India 7%, Russia 5%, South Africa and Brazil at about 1%. Each. More importantly, I think we should all heed the words of the BRICS environment ministers themselves from inside the BRICS, not some well-meaning outsider saying it. In 2016, they wrote in their communique, BRICS countries constitute significant parts of the world's population, land area, and natural resources. Thus, the choices that we make have global significance. So what choices will they make next year? Let me suggest a strategy for 2020 that begins with the St. Petersburg summit, but continues to the second BRICS one at Riyadh itself. And I think the St. Petersburg summit comes at a terrifically promising time, about 4 weeks after the G7 one, due to be hosted by the United States President Donald Trump. No surprise, climate change is not on the agenda at all, so it's really up to the BRICS. Start in St. Petersburg, but then we have the United Nations Summit, UN at 75 to renew it, as Mr. Rybakov spoke. Then Kunming, China, the great biodiversity, COP15, and climate change with the sinks is as much climate change as the climate change conference itself. It comes in Glasgow, Scotland, a day or two before the second BRICS summit in Riyadh, and then the G21 itself. So given what the BRICS has done in the past, the great foundation, but the landing spot of the G20 Riyadh summit, will there be a desire to hear what the BRICS will lead on there? Yes, there will. The Saudi host of the Riyadh summit has identified 22 priorities, and for the first time in G20 history, the natural environment has a prominent part. One of their 3 pillars is safeguarding the planet, 6 priorities. The first, controlling emissions through, and I quote, nature-based solutions such as reforestation. The second, combating land degradation and habitat loss by minimizing, quote, deforestation to conserve biodiversity and meet climate goals. The others, preserving the oceans, fostering sustainable and resilient water systems, promoting food security, and cleaner energy systems. I think I'm repeating the Brazilian presentation from a few moments ago. And environmental priorities, climate-related ones, appear directly in other parts of the agenda, implementing the Sustainable Development Goals, tourism, including its environmental impact, and one of my favorites, space cooperation, where, of course, Russia led the world a long time ago. Space cooperation, too, and I quote, contributes significantly to the protection of common global goods such as climate and the oceans. So what I would suggest is, in thinking of initiatives, and there's many good ideas out there, but I start with the science. What are the steps that are scientifically known to solve most of the climate change problem? And here I follow the authoritative Project Drawdown work. Its top 20 include 12 that are nature-based solutions. They focus on food and forests, although there's a few energy ones which you've already highlighted there. But amongst the top 5, reduce food waste comes 3rd, a plant-based diet 4th, and tropical forests 5th. I think that's the Brazilian part of it. They match very well the G20 summit agenda for Riyadh. Nature-based solutions, food and forests at the core, account for can solve about 37% of the emissions problem. With a footnote for energy, let me suggest the following on food and forests. So let me start with forests very quickly, because they're a major source of emissions when they burn, a major sink sequestration when they grow. So the BRICS summit could set and meet targets and timetables to reduce deforestation and enhance afforestation in keeping with its members' existing commitments to make the coming COP on biodiversity a success. Create, enforce, and support laws to replace all trees cut or destroyed by fire, pests, or by human activity. Agriculture responsible for about 73% of deforestation globally. Substitute wood for carbon-intensive steel and concrete in construction and infrastructure. So if you're looking to diversify your economy, go with forests. Substitute forest biochemicals for petrochemicals and plastics, in keeping with the BRICS' recent commitment to reduce the plastic waste that flows from its rivers into the oceans. and others even perhaps create a BRICS international firefighting force for emergency response and rapid deployment when a member requests support from its BRICS partners for abnormal acute outbreak events. On food, many more. First, reduce food loss and waste from farm to fork in accordance with Sustainable Development Goal 12, Target 3, by passing national legislation with targets, timetables, and supporting measures. Next, shifting subsidies from animal agriculture to plant-based food, so the farmers still get their money, but all benefit in the new way. Encourage local food ownership, production and consumption, especially in culturally appropriate ways. Provide innovative financing. I think we've just heard that, such as microloans for smallholder farmers, including women and youth that transition to agroforestry and diverse plant-based use. Endorse the 8 principles of the International Union for the Conservation of Nature on nature-based solutions. And finally, if perhaps a little bit more controversially, uphold the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples, the principles on free, prior, informed consent, and the land tenure rights of local and indigenous communities. So thank you for your attention. Spasibo большое.
Thank you, John. To ask Madeleine Koch to comment on, who is Executive Director of the BRICS Research Group at the University of Toronto, and who has also been following the BRICS development closely together with us. Actually, we have got a long-term partnership, the Academy and University of Toronto, and as Sergei Alexeyevich said, we also love BRICS, and we think this is an important institution. Madeleine?
Thank you, Marina. I'll abbreviate my remarks so we have time also to hear Binod, because I think we're running a bit short on time. So I'm going to pick up on the question of the effectiveness and the legitimacy of the BRICS in order to support those 2 characteristics. I think it's important that we look at the commitments the leaders make at their summit and how well those commitments are complied with from one summit until the next. And this is a project that, as Marina said, we at the BRICS Research Group have been working on. BRICS Research Group is based at the University of Toronto, but also with our colleagues here at the Center for International Institutions Research based at RANEPA. So as we look forward to the commitments that the St. Petersburg Summit will make, it's a good opportunity to look at how those promises can be kept and what the leaders can do to improve their compliance with those promises. So I'll just give a brief review of the commitments the leaders have made, and then look at the compliance record as we've monitored it. And then I have a couple of thoughts on how compliance might be improved going forward. Since the leaders first met at Yekaterinburg in 2009, the BRICS have made 726 commitments, as we've identified, on a wide range of 32 issue areas, which span many sectors, including trade, the digital economy, as we've heard, human rights, health, gender, all kinds of other issues. But these subjects are so dispersed that many of them have received fewer than 10% of the total commitments. The exception is international cooperation, which has received 130 commitments. That's only 18%, however. And that's followed by development with 64 commitments, which is 9%. The most commitments ever were made the last time Russia hosted the summit at Ufa in 2015 with 130 commitments. Not surprisingly, most on international cooperation. Also on information communications and technology and the digital economy. I see a theme here with the St. Petersburg Summit. And food and agriculture. Using the database that we've developed with the BRICS Research Group and the CIIR, we have assessed compliance with 69 of those commitments made since 2009 at Yekaterinburg up to the 2018 Johannesburg Summit. Overall, we find that compliance is 74%. That peaked in 2016 at 89% and then dipped more recently with the following two summits to 63%. Only one commitment was assessed at 2009, the 2009 summit, and all the members complied with it, so that has the highest compliance score to date. China tends to be the highest complier with a rate of about 81%. And South Africa, which has only been assessed since 2011, which was the first summit it participated in, has the lowest compliance score of 66%. Russia's compliance has followed the average trend. It's often among the top compliers, as it was with Durban in 2013 and Fortaleza in 2014, and particularly with UFA in 2015. But it's declined since then, and for the last two summits we've assessed, Russia had the lowest compliance. So improving compliance with the St. Petersburg commitments will be an important task. All 5 BRICS members are important members of the G20 research group, the G20, not just the G20 research group. Indeed, apart from the G7, the BRICS is the only other leaders level bloc within the framework. And as we heard, the BRICS has no secretariat or binding charter. Those are characteristics shared with the G20, and they both function by making consensus-driven collective decisions. The BRICS plays an important role within that framework, and the BRICS members have committed to cooperate with the developed country members to increase multilateralism and promote a rules-based order, which we hear is a prime function of the BRICS. And the BRICS, as we know, hold a meeting, a leaders-level meeting informally on the eve of the summit, the G20 summit. So it's perhaps not surprising that BRICS members' compliance with their G20 commitments, as monitored by the G20 Research Group and also the CIIR, follows the same trends as all the average G20 members taken together. For the 13 summits, G20 summits that we've assessed between 2008 and Buenos Aires in 2018, the average G20 compliance is 75%, and the BRICS members' compliance is 70%. When the two summits began first meeting, the gap between the BRICS members and the G20 as a whole was 13%, but since 2015, that gap has disappeared. When the compliance rates of the two standalone institutions are compared, before 2013, BRICS members' compliance varied, jumping from 63% with the 2010 Brasilia commitments to 80% the following year with the Sanya commitments, and then back down to 64% with the Delhi commitments in 2012. And G20 compliance had a smoother trend, mostly in the range of the 70s. But the two groups have complied at similar rates from the 2013 summit, which was the year Russia hosted the G20 summit in St. Petersburg, and South Africa hosted its first summit, until 2016, when the two compliance trends diverged. As we approach the summits in 2020, we will have the compliance scores for last year's Osaka G20 summit and Brasilia BRICS summit, so we'll have a better idea of how those trends will continue. And then finally, a word on how compliance can be improved. Research produced by the G20 Research Group has come up with several ways this can be done, including how the leaders craft their commitments and what activities the members engage in the over the course of the presidency. Excuse me. Two particular tactics stand out: making commitments that contain features that bind the members to act, and holding ministerial meetings on subjects directly related to the summit agenda. Of course, on the former, we'll have to wait to see what commitments are made by the leaders at St. Petersburg in July. But on the latter, we can expect promising results because we already know Russia will be hosting several ministerial meetings over the coming months. So we look forward to July to finding out all the secrets that the summits will reveal.
Thank you, Madeleine. Thank you. I think, well, as we are coming to the end of the discussion, I know that Binod will give us insights into the future, and because India is taking over from Russia in 21, but then India is taking over the presidency in G20 in 22. So India will have two challenging successful years. We are all looking forward to that. And I think one of the difficulties probably will be to ensure that there is a continuity between these, the agendas in these two formats. But this is a challenge on one hand, but this is also an advantage on the other hand. So, Binod, can you please provide us the insights into the future from the viewpoint of India?
Thank you very much. Thank you, Russia. Thank you, Gaidar Forum. First of all, I pay my homage to the Premier of Russia earlier, Mr. Gaidar. If he was here today, he must be proud of Russia, proud of RANEPA. If there was no Russia, I think it is hard to conceive there was BRICS. So India is lucky that after BRICS, its presidency comes after Russia. And it has a lot of things on the table to implement. I would like to say something off the record. Prime Minister Modi has been very active in partnership with BRICS, with Russia. In last 1 year, he has made, I think, 7 times to Russia. You invite him even for the future Gaidar Forum. I think my Prime Minister will come because there's a lot to learn from Russia. And also at the same time, I personally believe after going to all the 5 countries, Brazil, Russia, India, China, South Africa, I think all these 5 countries are naturally very beautiful. You love to travel in Moscow, in all the countries. So I request all of my colleagues, my Druzia, that in this new year, when you are making some new commitment, you should visit the 5 countries. This is going to give a very good boost to our BRICS cooperation, and we'll be your guide. Thank you. And second thing I would like to mention that Canada is our very good friend. We are sorry for the losses in the Iran recently, and we hope that world will come back to the peace, and we pray for their families. And in future, I'm not sure if Canada wants to join BRICS, we'll have one country from North America. So let's think of that, because there are many BRICS members living in Canada. And the kind of topics discussed today by my senior colleagues from Canada, South Africa, and things, to tell you in very brief, I agree with them, and you know, we should take it forward. But there are so many topics, there are so many agendas, there are so many forums. Is there something BRICS is focused so that we should know that BRICS has done this? You know, this is a specific contribution from BRICS. Everybody is working on climate change. Why BRICS should also give so much time on climate change? If you see you just Google the news, India and China has contributed maximum numbers of greenery, you know. We have increased our green forest coverage from 24 to 32%. Check the facts. And this year in Delhi, temperature has gone down to 2%. It's the first time in the last 100 years. India's contribution to greenhouse emission is the minimum, which is per capita, because there's no industry, there's no manufacturing. Now, if you ask me, yes, Mr. Singh, you have agriculture. Now, we have the largest population on this planet. Whether it's WTO or it's COP15 or it's my friends from Canada, we can't stop feeding these people. Yes, we are looking forward to Russia. Russia has huge land. Russia has done wonderful in agriculture. But Russian products are not going to India. Why? Only Madam Natalia can help me on this project. So there are a lot of interesting food items in Russia which Indians would love to buy, but I can't buy in India. So every time I come to Russia for a forum, I just stay here. I go to supermarket, I buy my food, whatever, like, and I don't have to always eat outside in the restaurant. So this is a practical example of cooperation, which I also saw in the Brazil. Brazil has amazing land, amazing forest. You know, today, Jeff Bezos is in Delhi, the richest man on this planet. He's in Delhi. And we are talking about BRICS, next place, please. We are talking about BRICS cooperation. But in reality, what we see is that we are going very slow. We thought BRICS countries will lead the economic innovation, GDP growth, and our focus was quite different. We focused on Gazprom, gas, oil. Yeah, India, Russia, very good cooperation. Cross-border investment, M&A, and everything is going fine. But these are the large companies, and their shares are going down. The real winners of last decades, now they're calling FANG, F-A-N-G. Facebook, the Alphabet, the name of Google, F-A-N, Netflix, Google, and all these companies. It's they whose market share, whose share price has gone high. People are trying to take down President of USA, Trump. But look how the share market of the Americans are, doing well. So not all the Americans want Trump to go down. They're happy with their money and with their income. So end of the day, this for last 1 decade, I think, some point, as our chair or Madam Natalia mentioned, that we couldn't foresee the future. The future is technology. Future is innovation. It's the tech companies, the unicorns, the way China has, jumped. Why China has increased its global GDP from, just 9% to 16%. No other country has done this big, achievement. Almost doubled its GDP share in the world economy. Same United States. It was 20%, now it is 26%. So their share in GDP has grown because they have the tech companies. Russia, India, we have the engineers, some of the smartest engineers, but sorry, they're working for Silicon Valley. I met many Russian colleagues in California. They're working on blockchain. I said, why don't you go back to Moscow and do something? No, it's not allowed. So unless and until our government becomes futuristic and opens the door for new innovation, despite there's a controversy, why not? Climate change has a controversy. Russia only come out with this document on climate change just recently, just 15th November. Before that, Russia don't care what's climate change. We have, huge land. So end of the day, I think the problem is the government for innovation, for technology. So I'll not go one by one because my seniors have mentioned the point. I just want to focus today on digital economy. Ladies and gentlemen, India has just 15% people, 15% of the area where they can have, buy online. 75% of the shopping is still on the small streets. So if you go to New Delhi is full of small shops. And when Prime Minister Modi stopped the old currency, 500 and 1,000, all these shops are having hard time. So despite World Bank ask India, Mr. Modi, do this reform, do that reform. Now India has the lowest tax rate, 22% corporate tax, almost like United States. But no FDI from China, no FDI from any other country. India is growing very slow despite all the reforms. Where is the question? How India or how BRICS can help India? The answer is that our focus is not exactly on the right sectors. We are still talking about traditional sectors, minerals and all these things. So I have listed in this slide some of the sectors which I believe Indians, Russians, Chinese, and even Brazilian colleagues have excellent advantage. And we don't have to be lazy. When I was in Brazil for the last summit of BRICS, the Brazilian secretary for the trade told me that your diplomats are very lazy. They hardly meet us before and after BRICS, So our meetings are not so kind of frequent. I beg pardon if some of my speeches are off the record. I just said in the evening. So health sector, India, Russia, China, still many people cannot afford the health sector. So use of technology can really help our countries. And I have seen in Russia, in St. Petersburg University, in many universities, there are huge technology, but Russians are not the good salesmen. They are focused on technology and development and innovation. But nobody knows outside that what you're doing. So I believe I think Russian products, Russian technology needs to be popularized, needs to be marketized, just like Chinese are doing. You go and see in Delhi, we have 6,000 Chinese people selling something from Alibaba. So kind of things Chinese are doing, I also expect maybe due to less population in Russia, I think we need to have some different thinking. Now, my next point is this food processing sector. Again, for the last 2-3 years, Russia has increased its food production like anything. Now, almost we are touching 8 billion people by 2025. Now, if there's no good technology for this food preservation and transportation, I think people will continue to die. Doesn't matter in which country. I believe one day we, kind of endorse that it's one family. BRICS is one family, or the whole world is one family. This is the basic philosophy we have in India, in China, in Russia. But why, despite having a lot of plenty, people are still dying because of hunger? This is a question we must take on humanitarian ground. Now, next is something, the colleague from Sputnik, he really asked the question, because every young man in India and China and Russia, they understand that if you want to become rich, you have to do something different, because it's very hard to become rich by working for a company or by working for your government. And life is very expensive, even to buy a home in Delhi or Beijing or Moscow. So I think blockchain technology is something very new, where we call it Gen X, Gen Y, or Generation Z. They are thinking. I think they're working very hard. If sometime, in the future, we really open that blockchain or digital currency or cryptos can work on the sidelines. For example, in China, already they are accepting, for the carbon credit, for the climate change companies. They're paying in the tokens, they're paying in the cryptos. And government knows this, but there's no crime in this. So similar way, there are certain sectors which we can do on the pilot project. And if it works for them, I think the future will be bright for all of us. So for the e-commerce, the market cannot be integrated before we have a common payment system. For China, Russia, the border is there, so a lot can happen. But India and Russia and Brazil and South Africa are too far. So we need some digital kind of connection where we can interact, we can pay, and we can enjoy each other's products. For the digital payments, why blockchain is important for all of us? Because there is a lack of trust between our countries, and without something guaranteeing the payments, I think it is very hard to integrate our market. So the level of market integration in the BRICS countries is not very ideal, and we have to work on this front. So I think people here, they understand what is blockchain, what are the sectors. Blockchain is already, many private companies, or even starting from IBM to all the big companies, they have blockchain department. So it's the private sector who is leading the blockchain. Government is not able to openly come out and fund some projects, except China, where the Chinese president just gave an open statement that blockchain is good. And within one night, the Bitcoin had a 40 to 50% of rise. It's a maniac. So I think as of now, it's underground, but maybe in future, we need to take it seriously on blockchain. So after the Brazilian declaration, we really hope that in Russia, we have some concrete statement that blockchain is not bad. Yes, we need to regulate it. We need to have some pros and cons for that. And for that, as our Sherpa from Russia, he said, we need consensus, so that will take time. Blockchain technology almost started in 2009 and is getting mature, and people from Russia are one of the most active contributor. I again repeat the name of Vitalik Buterin and his colleagues who are based out of Canada, and they have founded the best smart contract called Ethereum, and that is going to change the way government interacts with government and with business and with public. All right, so it's very hard for some people to conceive that blockchain will really become a reality. But if we see the financial development for the last 500 years, of course, the banks came from Italy, first of all, and the first paper currency was introduced in China. And now we have bank ATM, we have online banking. We hope within 5 to 10 years, by 2030, the blockchain and digital payment will be a reality, and our BRICS countries should have a common policy on this on this technology background. Again, I need to put this here in perspective that in 97, total foreign exchange was 475 billion, and now last year it has gone to this 6.6 quadrillion. It's a data for 1 year, not for 1 day. For 1 day it goes to trillion. So still the world is dominated by one currency, by one superpower, and I don't know why the leaders of the BRICS are very shy to touch the status quo. I can say openly here, let the WTO die. I don't see any functioning of WTO helpful for solving any problem. Why China is going today, Chinese leadership is in Washington, D.C., and hopefully they are signing the trade deal, which whole world is watching today. So where is WTO in this? It is becoming bilateral. So the concept of multilateral order for trade has failed us, and it's not too late to say goodbye to WTO and take the trade should be on the regional forum. Again, let me conclude now that in the social media, you always see some statements from the leadership, from our BRICS countries, that we need to educate our people what is blockchain, what is cryptos, then only we can have a consensus. And I totally agree on this ground that we don't have to hurry also on that background. Bill Gates, again, right now the richest man, he said very well, the world needs banking, but it doesn't need banks. So sooner or later, it's a love and hate relationship. We do want good banking and good banks, but sometimes we have to get rid of those bureaucracy in the banking. As Russia is moving away from SWIFT and trying to have its new payment system, which will reduce time and cost, I think this project can be given to BRICS common team to work on a common payment system and come out in a time frame, not just go, and for the next year. The guys, engineers in India, engineers in Russia and China can give this report within 1 month or 2 months. So thank you, RANEPA, thank you, this forum, and we look forward and wish all the best to the presidency of Russia, and we will take forward from there next year in India. I cannot say I speak on behalf of India, but it's a puzzle that, within BRICS, we have so many controversy. How to reach consensus? I give you one more example of 5G and Huawei. We don't have any Chinese colleague here today. But there are countries in BRICS who are so selfish. They do believe in stealing the technology, stealing the IPRs. So, under the table, there are a lot of concerns to open the market. That's why we talk very good on the table about consensus, but our market is closed. I hope things will change. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Binod. Thank you for a very emotional and insightful statement. I think this is a very good insight into the future. And again, the digital agenda, digital currencies, digital technologies seem to be more, I expect it to be more and more in the focus of the BRICS. And this is obviously the universal tendency, not only the tendency for the BRICS, but for the other institutions. I must say that Professor Chen Yi unfortunately was not able to join us from China, was not able to join us at the last moment, but he's got his statement in written form, and all the statements have been recorded, and everything will be posted on the website. And I think that it has been a very rich discussion, and I don't know, but maybe some of the ideas which were flown here would be useful for the Russian presidency or for the future development of the BRICS. And I'm very sorry that we do not have time for questions and answers, but I'm sure that there will be plenty of opportunities for that over the break, over lunch. And thanks again for all those who have been here today for discussion of the BRICS achievements and BRICS future. Thanks a lot.